Sometimes we have something that has a display none on it and we want to click and then make it appear, but we don't want it just to boop, appear on the screen. We want it to fade in or slide in or do something a little bit more interesting than just appearing there. Sadly, we can't animate or transition the display property. So in this video, we're going to be looking at how we can do just that and actually animate something in from a display none to being there and then fade back away before returning to its display none state. Hello, my front end friends. I'm so glad that you've come to join me once again. And if you're new here, my name is Kevin, and here at my channel, I help you fall madly, deeply in love with CSS. And if I can't get you to fall in love with it, I'm hoping to at least help you be a little bit less frustrated by it. And I think the whole display none animation thing is one of those things that drives people absolutely crazy. And the reason it's even front of mind is recently I did a video on creating a pop-up modal or dialog using the dialog element, and with that it just appeared and then disappeared. And in the comments, a lot of people were asking me about animating it in and animating it out. And it just so happens to start as a display none and then change its display property and then go back to a display none when you close it. So I saw this as a really nice opportunity to explore how we can do just that. So we're going to work our way through making it appear, then making it disappear. We're going to add in an animation so it also slides in and doesn't just fade back and forth. I'm going to look at how we can also close it by clicking on the close button, but also by clicking on the outside area as well. And we'll wrap the whole thing up by looking at a cool trick that we can do with shadows. And yeah, let's go and dive right into it. So first of all, I have created these keyframes already. I have a fade in animation here, a fade out animation here, and I have my slide up animation right here. And we actually do need to have a fade in and fade out animation. You can't run one in reverse. We'll look at why that is as we go through this. But we do have the fade in, a fade out, and just for fun, I added that slide there, which aren't doing, they're all fairly straightforward little animations. So the first thing we can do is let's actually add that. So we're going to choose my modal, and I just called it modal, like it's dialog and then my class modal. You can obviously target however you want. And when it is open, we want to add that animation on there. So we can do when we have the open attribute on there, and that is one thing that, use your dev tools. And a lot of this was me going in the dev tools, seeing what the default stylings are and other things. But we can see when we open it, if you look in here, I have my dialog right there, and it has that open attribute on it. And if I push that, you can see it goes away and then it comes back on. So a lot of what we're going to be doing is targeting and taking advantage of that open attribute being here. So when it opens, we can add the animation. So do a fade in over 500 milliseconds, and we'll say forwards, just so it stops at the end of the animation. And let's just start with that actually. And now if I do my open dialog, and there's that first gotcha is actually, you'll notice the backdrop isn't actually fading in. So if we come here and we could do modal backdrop, and let's just give it a background of black for now. And again, if you're not familiar with what this is, I'd recommend checking out the previous video where I go into that in more detail. So when I click that, you can see the backdrop doesn't fade in, it just appears. There are ways of changing this. We could actually say this has an opacity of 0, and then my modal open, we're going to see a simpler, better, not better maybe, but here we could do opacity backdrop, and then ideally you'd be able to do this, right? And then here we could do a transition of opacity of 500 milliseconds as well. So if I try that, you'll notice it doesn't actually work. It's still doing what it was originally doing, even though this, I think, should work according to the spec. Another thing we could do actually though, is instead of that, I'm going to keep opacity at 0 here, but I can actually put this same animation. And outside of Firefox, this works. And for some reason, the animations right now, there is a bug report for Firefox that's been filed. You'll see that actually does allow me to fade it in along with it, which is kind of cool. So you can animate your backdrop property. And so, yeah, well, why don't we actually leave that like that for now? Instead of black here, I'm just going to do an RGB of 000 over 0.5, let's just say. So it's dark enough in the background. And let's see that one more time. There we go. So that looks a little bit better, and then we can close there. So we have that working on that way. And then the closing part is where things get a little bit trickier though, because when we close, that attribute just vanishes. So how can we deal with that, and how can we actually make that work? Well, the reason we can fade it in is because we're starting with an opacity of 0, and then we're adding that transition to go from opacity 0 and transitioning that in. The problem is when we close this modal, and this is again, use your dev tools, see how things are working. Why are things disappearing? Like, why is it not there? Well, if we look at our dialog here, and let's just make this a little bit bigger, you'll notice dialog not open, display none. And we can't animate from something to display none or from display none to something else. It works when we come inwards because the display is switching, but the opacity is at 0, and then it transitions it up. So to get this to fade out, we actually need to fade it away and then get that display none to come on. And so really this display none is getting in our way. So maybe we can we're going to look at the solution, but then the problem with the solution and the way to fix it from there. Here we're going to do a display of block. Now, one other problem with it is the positioning of it's going to be mucked up a little bit. So when I open it, it's actually going to have to open it here. It's going to move and then jump back down. So we can fix that actually by doing an inset of 0, which is the default value that it has. So now we can, it's already closed, but we can see it. So then we open it and then we close it, but it stays on the screen because we have a display block. Okay, so when we close it, we actually want it to fade away. How can we do that? And so that's where we can come in and use my fade out animation. And the reason we need to have a different animation is if we used fade in for both the fade in and the fade out and we just tried to reverse it, it's seeing this as having the same animation in both directions and it doesn't actually run it a second time. So it is important that we have the different animation here. So we can say animation is going to be fade out 500 milliseconds forwards. Now this presents other problems. So now actually let's see, we can open it and we can close it. That's wonderful, right? Well, there's a lot of problems with having this as display block right now. First of those problems is that if I come here, like I'm actually interacting with the modal. And there, look, there's the hand icons coming up because I have that button that's here. Even though I can't see it, it's there. So let's come down here just for fun and change my fade out for a second. So now notice how now when this is at 0.2, it's there still, right? So we haven't actually closed the modal, we're just visually hiding it. So that means we could interact with it, the button is still here. I can't actually select the text underneath my modal because I'm selecting the modal itself, and that's a problem. And we could do one thing here to help fix that, which actually here, display block, let's just do it right here. We could do a pointer events of none. And this isn't fixing everything, but it's a first step. But a pointer events none means that I can't actually click on these things. So like if I try interacting here, it's not working, but I can select the text underneath it. So from a mouse perspective, or from clicking with like your finger, it's as if it's not there. But if I use my keyboard, I can still navigate into it. And if there was a screen reader going through this, it would still be able to access that, even if the visibility, or not the visibility, but the opacity in this was all the way down to a 0. So even though it's not visible, that screen reader would still be able to interact with it. If your keyboard navigating through, you'd end up on an invisible button, and that's not really ideal. So this, to me, we sort of need it, but the problem is where this is happening. And there's also this other problem. Let's just refresh the page. So I'm going to hit save. And actually, we can just refresh here if I change the HTML. See that? It fades in. Every time the page reloads, the animation runs because it's going to display block, and then it's doing the fade out animation. And that would suck. Every time the page coming in, it runs that the first time. And again, it's still there. It's still on the page. So we're going to come take all of this that we just created. I'm going to remove it from here. And we're going to create our own little special thing here after this, where I'm going to do a modal, and I'm going to call it closing. And so I'm just going to create my own attribute of closing. It's not a real attribute. If you want, I guess we could do like a data attribute, data closing, since it's our own. I'm just going to do closing. So when my modal is closing, then we can do all of this. Now, that means opening is still going to work, but when we close, we need it to get this closing thing, and we need to play around with the animations and do a few little things on this. So let's come into our JavaScript to be able to do this. And now, instead of just closing it, what we need to do is run that animation. Then once the animation is finished, then we actually physically close the modal, and it will no longer be in the DOM because it'll go back to being display none. So when somebody clicks on this, what we actually want to do, instead of immediately closing the modal, is first what we want to do is turn on that closing attribute. So we can choose our modal and do set attribute of, we want to set the attribute of closing, and we want to set it to nothing, basically. Or you could do true, whatever you want. But as long as you have the closing attribute here, it should work where when we open it, and let's just get rid of this. And then when we close it, it will visually close, but again, it's still going to be in the DOM. If we go and look, it's not a display none. It has the closing attribute on there, and you can see it has the display block here still. So let's try that again. Open, close. Oh, the backdrop is staying open. That wasn't happening before, because before we were actually closing the modal, I think. So we'll have to fix that as well. All right, so modal set attribute closing. Then that means it's going to run that animation of closing, so it's going to visually hide it. And I guess what we should do actually, let's fix that backdrop thing first, where we can say closing is, so we have modal open. Let's do our modal closing. Backdrop is also just going to get the animation of fade out, 500 milliseconds forwards. Right, so now we don't want a comma there. So now it should actually close or get rid of the backdrop as well. There we go. But again, it is still there, and we need to remove that from the DOM now. So what we want is we do want to run this, but we have to do it once this closing animation is finished. So we can do that with an event listener. So we say modal.add event listener. And here we can do an animation end. And just be careful, it's not animation end like that. I make that mistake all the time, and then it doesn't work. So we're doing a listen for when an animation on the modal finishes. And as soon as an animation on the modal finishes, then we can do something. So we'll come here and we'll do another function. And well, what do we want to do? Well, one of the things we want to do is actually close the modal. So we can move that up to here. And the other thing is we don't really want that attribute still left on there. I think it would make, it's closing and then it should go away. So here we can say that our modal, and we can do a remove. I don't think it would really be problematic if it was there, but or it might actually, because maybe it would conflict. So whatever, doesn't matter. We're just going to remove it, and then we don't have to worry about anything weird happening. Now, this does present one problem of when we do it, I can't open why can't I open my modal? Well, what's happening is this is actually working right now. If you did this the first time, let's refresh the page here. And the first time it runs, we can open it and it's fine because there's no event listener yet. But as soon as I click close modal, this event listener has been added. So now as long as there's any animation on there, it's listening. So as soon as that happens again, now any animation that happens on it is going to trigger the modal close. There is a solution to this though, and that's we can tell this event listener to only run one time. So we just come down here, put a comma, open and close curly braces, and say once true, just like that. And now we can open it, we can close it, and then we can open it again and close it again. And this is working as we open it, there's nothing running. When I click close, it's not running the close modal. What it's doing is it's running this event listener. So it's waiting for that animation to finish. When it's finished, it removes the attribute, it closes the modal, and then it kills that event listener. So now there's no more event listener on it. I can click on it. It's open, there's no event listener runs, event listener goes away. So if we come and take a look in the DOM now at what's actually happening, let's find the dialog, it's right here. And so if I click open, you can see it opens, it stays opened. And then if I click close, it's closing, and then as soon as that animation is finished, it's gone. And of course, we can improve this a little bit by coming over and let's just add a second animation to my open here. So modal, we have fade in, and let's also do a slide up 500 or slide in, I think I called it, slide in 500 milliseconds forwards. So let's just run this and see if it works. Or was it slide up? I thought it was slide in, slide up. There we go. So we can have it slide in and then go away or whatever we want. You can do different things with this just to make it look a little bit prettier or fancier. Now, one little got you is on the closing of this. Let's say you wanted a different time on this closing and on the modal closing here. And you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this backdrop up just because here we have the modal open and then the backdrop open, and then we can have the close and the close. I think grouping them together makes it a bit easier. Let's say we wanted to fade out the background slower than we fade out the modal itself. That's not actually going to work. See how it jumps now? And that's because the event listener is looking for any animation to end. So as soon as this 5,000 milliseconds is finished, it just cuts, it does the modal close and everything shuts down. So it is one limitation for this. Now you could actually put them both at 2000 and play with the timings of them in like the percentages and everything to get it to work a little bit better. So it's a bit up to you. If you do feel like you need something a little bit fancier, of course, you can set things up in a different way. So while it's looking really good, there actually is still a problem with our backdrop. I'm going to get to that in a second. But before we talk about that, another thing that people ask me about is how we can close if we click over here instead of either using the form, which you can use, or using a close button. So what we can actually do is, instead of having the event listener just for our close modal here, we can also have one on the modal itself. So modal add event listener of a click, and we're going to have to do a little bit with this to get it to actually work. But if somebody clicks on the modal, we can run the close modal method right here. So let's put that there and just see. So now if I open it, it opens, and if I click, you gotta spell listener, right? Add the ER there. I spell listener wrong a lot. I also leave off the E here all the time. So now if we open it, it opens, but if I click, it closes. But this isn't perfect yet, because if I open it like that, and then I click here, it also closes, which is not very good. So we don't want to run this no matter what. We only want to run it if somebody clicks on the backdrop. So to be able to do this, I am going to put in, we're going to sort of track this event. So let's do a console log here of e.target, just so we can see what happens when we click on different things here. And let's open up the console. I think we should be able to get it here in CodePen's console. So let's try this out. And if I click there, we should get now, oh, I don't want to close modal because that's going to muck things up a little bit. Open modal, and so open modal, click, and we're getting exactly what we're clicking on. Now that's cool, and if I click on the backdrop, you can see that it's selecting the entire thing, and if I click on here, it's selecting just the paragraph. Now we can get a little bit more information here by saying node name. And so now let's open it again and try clicking, and undefined. This should be node name capital. And so now when we open it, if I click here, we get P because it's a paragraph. If I click on here, it's my H2. If I click on my close modal, it's a button, which is closing it because we still have that event listener going. And if we click on different areas here, we can see I can actually click on the dialog itself because I'm clicking in the padding that's on the sides there. But if I click out here, I'm also clicking on the dialog. Cool. So what we could actually say is if e target node name is equal to dialog, and you'll notice it's all caps, so I'm going to do all caps here. We're going to have to change a little bit of how our dialog is set up, but that's fine. Then we can do our modal close. And now let's come in, we're going to open our modal, click here, nothing's happening because we just get our P, click on the title, nothing happens. Oh, I clicked on the dialog, so it did close. There we go, click on the H2, nothing happens, and I click out here and it closes. That does lead to the issue of the fact that I can click like here and then it actually closes it, which we don't want to happen. We only want it to close when I click on that outer part. There's no bubbling when this happens or anything, so this won't cause any issues there. But all I'm going to do here is put in modal content, cut that. We're just wrapping everything here. And we're wrapping everything in a modal content. Now, it does require this extra little bit, or actually there's two ways we could do this. And there is default padding on the modal, which I never took off. So here we're just going to say padding is 0. And the two solutions that we could use here, we don't need this anymore. So now if I open it, everything is stuck. So on the padding there, so one solution, if you didn't want to do this, is you could do your padding 0 and then just say modal and choose everything that's inside and add some padding. I don't really like that solution because then like what's first, what's second, and all of that. So in this case, we're just going to say modal content has padding of 1 rem, let's just say. And so now when I'm in here, my margins and stuff are off just because there's a margin top on here and stuff. But now I can click and it's not actually closing, even if I'm getting close to the edge. And that's because all those times that I was clicking, let's open up the console again, I'm clicking on the div that's in there. And so like even when I'm clicking really close to the edge, I'm only clicking on that div because there's no the padding is on the div itself and it's not clicking on the dialog. And of course, if you click off of it, then it actually closes. So definitely a little bit of a workaround. You got to play around with it a little bit to get it to work. But that definitely does work. And I did mention that there is a problem with animating the backdrop, and that is currently in Firefox. The backdrop you'll see is not actually, the animation's not working. And it is a bug. It has been filed with Firefox, but right now it's not working. But there's actually a really simple fix to this, which is kind of nice. So what we can do to fix this is, instead of using a backdrop, what I'm going to do is the backdrop's opacity, and actually it does simplify things a little bit, because we're going to take this off. And now we just, whether we're in Chrome or in Firefox, we will have no backdrop because it never comes in. But what we can do is, on the modal itself, I have a small drop shadow on here, so I'm just going to do a second one. So we can do that. You can have as many drop shadows as you want. You just have to comma separate them. And this is custom prop. Don't worry too much about it. It's giving me a shadow. It's coming from Open Props, which I'll link to in the description if you're curious. But what I can do is do a box shadow of 0 offset on both directions, 0 blur, and then 100 viewport width on the spread. And then say an RGB of 0, 0, 0 over 0.5, just so we have the opacity coming in. And the nice thing with box shadows, they won't cause overflows because they're not really part of the the box model and things like that. So they're just like a visual representation only. And it's going to keep that same fade in and fade out that we have on the modal itself, because this is actually part of the modal. And as you can see, it works and gives us the same type of behavior here. A little bit less CSS because we don't need to worry about fading in or handling this. We can get rid of this code here as well. I'll leave it in the code pen just in case people are diving into it, but then we get that working that way, and that's nice and cool. I think that works really well and is a nice fallback for when the backdrop can't work. It just does mean you can't run different, you can't do something different. This is part of my modal itself, so you can't run different timings on them or other things like that. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to know more box shadow tricks like this one, you can check out this video right here. And with that, I want to say a very big thank you to my supporters of Awesome over on Patreon, Jan, Johnny, Stuart, Tim, and Doug, as well as all my other patrons for their monthly support. And of course, until next time, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.